wear immaculate and rather smart costumes. In a way, Stubbs is trying to affirm their dignity. He's also showing, in an almost manifesto or diagrammatic style, the different activities, from the raking to the reaping to the putting on the back of the hayrick. But at the same time, he's imposing this huge sense of order in the work. Look at this composition here. It's a very strong pyramid. And then the dominant form there on the right-hand side of the owner or the agricultural estate manager. The idle classes just looking over the workers at work. And then in the distance, there's a spire also looming large in the picture. And these two symbols of authority which tower over the people going about their daily tasks. And I think one of the things Stubbs is trying to do here, apart from choreograph what's tantamount to a mechanical or workers' ballet, is show the dignity and the hard work that goes on in the countryside. And at the time, there was growing dissent in the countryside, and certainly amongst the urban classes, there was a feeling that the countryside was a problem. And what Stubbs is trying to do is redress the balance and show a disciplined and harmonious world there. And he showed these at the Royal Academy, and he also used them as a basis for popular prints, perhaps to show the world that in fact the countryside wasn't much of a problem. But the response was critical. In fact, people said this isn't how the countryside is. It didn't reinforce the stereotypical view. Now, if we spin on a couple of hundred years to 1977, when there's a danger that these works will be lost to the nation, but of course the nation rallies, raises the money, and here they are now preserved for posterity. In the press, all the talk is of these works embodying or capturing the essence of Englishness, something that subsequently is lost. In fact, though, that flies totally in the face of the response to those who saw these works initially. And there's something deeply and quite satisfyingly contradictory about these paintings. In 1795, at the age of 71, Stubbs embarked on the systematic task of exploring and recording the comparative anatomy of humans, tigers, and common fowl. Over the next 11 years, Stubbs produced more than 120 drawings and 4 volumes of text. What is proposed by the comparative anatomy is that scientific inquiry could be beautiful and enlightening, that science and aesthetics are not opposed, but could exist fruitfully together, an idea which still has contemporary resonance. Stubbs' last great work, and some would say his greatest, now resides in Northern Ireland at Mount Stewart, one of the country houses of the family who commissioned it. Henry Vane Tempest was a 28-year-old landowner who was wealthy enough to indulge in his twin passions of racing and gambling, and who, in 1796, bought one of the great horses of his time, Hambletonian. You could say that Stubbs immortalised Hambletonian, but in fact, his place in racing history was assured. He'd won the Doncaster Gold Cup and the St Leger, and then on the 25th of March 1799, he took part in one of the races of the decade, together with another great horse called Diamond, whose owner, Joseph Cookson, and Henry Vane Temple put up a purse between them of 3,000 guineas. The race was staged at Newmarket, where Stubbs had painted over the previous few decades, and drew crowds of tens of thousands. Apparently, according to contemporary accounts, you couldn't get a bed within a 15-mile radius of the place, and over 30,000 guineas were bet on it. The winner, of course, was Hambletonian. And immediately, his owner, Vane Tempest, commissioned 2 works from Stubbs, and this is the only one that's left, and one of his most celebrated paintings. What you'd expect to see is the drama of the race itself. Now, what Stubbs gives us is a rather private moment after the most dramatic public spectacle, and that's extraordinarily subtle. What you'd expect to see here is a horse in triumph. What you see is a horse with its teeth slightly flared. It's clearly exhausted, but still has this great sense of energy. It's cantering along, and it's being rubbed down, and it's being nurtured and cared for. And there's something very ordinary about that image that is also rendered extraordinary by the background that seems to be a general place, but also some kind of Arcadia, but also in the extraordinary way that Stubbs wrestles with the animal itself. It dominates the canvas. It's almost spread out across the entire length of the canvas, life-size, as if it's some scientific diagram. And you can only paint a horse with that beautiful glowing sheen and that musculature and a sense almost of an animal breathing if you've studied the animal, as Stubbs had, from the inside out. But there's also something else that's odd about it. Look at the young boy. His hand seems far too stretched, and in fact it would never reach quite as far. And then look at Hambletonian itself. Look how those legs are. The right legs and the left legs could never be in that configuration. And we're not quite sure why Stubbs chose to paint with this kind of oddness, except what we do know is that he was having a battle with Vane Tempest. And Vane Tempest refused to pay the amount of money that was agreed. And there was a court case, and in the end Stubbs did get his due fee for it. But Vane Tempest also wanted to corner the market in colour prints of this image, but by producing something so odd and so ordinary and such a behind-the-scenes view, of course, it would never sell on the popular market. So perhaps Stubbs, at the age of 78, is calling the shots. He won't be controlled anymore. But it's also as if Stubbs is feeling constrained by the framework of the genre of art, the sporting genre, in which he has painted for almost all of his life. And you get a sense here, finally, of an experimental artist who's trying to break out of all of that and effectively, if you'll excuse the pun, ride roughshod over it. Stubbs died on the 10th of July, 1806, in his London home. He was 82 years old, and although he'd been one of the most successful commercial painters over the previous 6 decades, it was discovered that he was still heavily in debt. Stubbs took a popular but low-regarded form of painting and gave it gravitas and authority. He stripped horse painting back to bare essentials and then built it up into a classical form of art. No British-born painter has ever had this obsessive attention to study and detail. But Stubbs was no dispassionate observer. Instead, he brought a weight of feeling to his work that sometimes makes the spine tingle, and which began to make human beings more aware of their place in the natural order of things.